So for people listening, I just want them to understand kind of why they need to understand what a cryptocurrency is in the blockchain, how this is going to affect their lives today and maybe in the next 10 years, to where they can understand. Because some people will say, well, I don't speculate in Bitcoin, so this doesn't have anything to do with me.
Of course.
But it actually does, because I think you can give people a really good framework of their own money. And look, I'm an American citizen. I'm here in the UK. I have to file US taxes. If I want to open up a bank account in this country, when I'm American, nobody wants to know who I am. Literally, they go running for the hills.
Yeah.
Because as an American citizen, they have to report all this stuff into the IRS. The IRS can come and mess with them, and they actually don't want anything to do with me. So
I'm British, and now that I'm American, I can't open a bank account with any of the banks here.
Right, go figure, right? So I'm penalized from that. Also, I have a business in London, but I collect most of my revenues in dollars. We do accept crypto for our academy as well, and that's why I had a second position about a year ago. But I actually can't open up a bank account in the US because the US doesn't want anything to do with me over here, because then I'll have to open a dollar account, then they want an entity there, and I got to file taxes there. And so we think we live in this world where, oh, my banking is normal and free, but it's not. Not to mention the transaction costs, the lack of privacy.
And that's for people who are incredibly privileged.
Privileged and also totally above board. And I can't run a business that's helping change the lives in a positive way, I'd like to think, of millions of people, and yet I'm restricted by this banking system. So it's not, this does apply to me. And God forbid I say something political on this show, and then, who knows what might happen to my money or my banking privileges or whatever, or my travel. So that's why I love talking to you, Andreas, and that's why I think people should really pay attention now, because actually your money, your privacy is paramount to your existence and our existence as a society.
But also to the freedoms we take for granted.
Correct.
And the funny thing is, I don't have to have that conversation in the countries where they don't take those freedoms for granted, or they don't have them. So in countries I visit where the government has caused problems in the past, so they've had dictatorships or they've had financial collapses and hyperinflation, this is all obvious and makes immediate sense. The problem is that in countries where we've had the privilege of stable long-term institutions and democratic freedoms, but we're gradually seeing many threats to these long-term institutions and freedoms, we take these so much for granted that we don't realize how quickly those can be lost, how quickly we can go to a situation where the combination of surveillance and surveillance capitalism, kind of corporate surveillance and state surveillance coming together, and one wrong election, and all of the things you thought were true are not true anymore. We've seen that happen in country after country after country, where the prime minister passes a seemingly innocuous law that changes term limits, and then they win the next election, and then they become president because they run out of term limits as prime minister, and then they pass a law that transfers all of the powers to the president, and then they abolish term limits as a president, and then they're president for life, right?
You're talking about Russia, Venezuela, or...
You could make a list.
Right.
Easily, right? And much closer to home, Turkey, for example. Right. So going from a secular democracy, even when the culture is very much steeped in democratic ideals and freedoms, to losing all of that really, really fast, it can happen here. It did happen in Europe not that long ago.
And you had personal experience of that in Greece, and your mom was there.
Yep.
And what were some of the realizations and implications that played out?
Well, I mean, Greece was basically asset stripped by the German banks in order to make sure they were capitalized enough to pretend they're solvent. And so they made loans. Those loans were bad. One of the reasons that loans come with interest rates is because they carry risk. So what happens with a bad loan? You write it off, the customer defaults, and you take the loss. But that was impossible, because if they actually wrote off the bad loans they gave to Greece, a whole bunch of French and German banks would be effectively insolvent. And they couldn't allow that to happen. It would be a domino effect. So instead, they asset stripped the middle class in Greece and used that
riots
to pay back the banks. The economy has now lost 40%.
And how do you asset strip the middle class? What does that look like from a government policy standpoint?
Half your pension's gone, even though you've been paying it, even private pensions. So you have a private pension. They force the private pension to buy government bonds that they then default on, and then they nationalize the pension. And 40% of your pension's gone, 50% of your pension's gone. If you have a state pension, even more. And in the meantime, all of the taxes and all of the costs go up. So in Greece, up to last year, the VAT was 25% on everything, including food, heating fuel, things like that. And even as the salaries and prices and pensions had dropped 50%, the prices of everything imported was up 50% at least. And the government taxes the middle class at outrageous rates. Like the average effective tax is more than 40% on the middle class. Turns out now Greeks are paying more taxes in the middle class than anybody else in Europe.
Wow.
Which is ironic. And all of this is to make sure that Greece can continue to make payments on loans that should have gone bad, so that those payments can go back to Deutsche Bank and Paribas and all of the other banks in Europe that made these bad loans, so that they can keep those loans on the asset side of their balance sheet to pretend they're solvent.
Right. And this could potentially happen to any country.
I mean, this is what's happened 4 or 5 times to Argentina. It's what was called shock doctrine, right? If you know the book, which the IMF comes in, they do a bailout with loans, they impose austerity, they demand repayments, they force the country to privatize all the assets, sell it to private companies, strip the pensions, and then the economy crashes, and then they have to take on more loans to pay the previous loans, and the cycle repeats every 20 or 30 years. It's a modern form of colonialism. It's been very effective.
Right, and we've seen that happen in Russia as well and other places.
Yeah.
Venezuela, we talked about last time, it's getting bad in Venezuela.
And keep in mind, this is not absent fault on the side of the borrowers. Quite the opposite. The governments that are borrowing enormous amounts of money on behalf of their people, right, and then putting it to very bad use or straight up corruption and funnel it into private investors, they walk away from this. And then all of the repayment burden falls onto the next generation. So, the mismanagement and the cronyism and the corruption that exists in Greece, but also in Venezuela and Argentina and other places, is out of control. But, in the end, no matter what a government does, it's always the people who pay for it, and not the people who are tax evading. They've got a nice little nest egg. Remember the Panama Papers?
Yeah, what they came out.
That was when we had a revelation that all of the world's rich politicians and corporate executives were hiding trillions of dollars in offshore bank accounts, and the only thing that happened was that the journalist who broke the story was murdered. Not a single thing happened other than that.
That was like 2-3 years ago?
Right.
Right. And then
so
nothing ever
among
came
them
up.
were also many of the Greek politicians who were corrupt, and nothing happened.
Okay.
They have the lists. Nothing happened.
So the individual listening to this, based on what you just said, should do what? Should they be careful of their savings in their local currency in their local country? Should they be aware of crypto?
They should, well, at a very basic level, they should diversify.